Hello and welcome to today's webinar, which is entitled Friend Zoned, How Your Hashtagging Got You Hacked. My name is Ted Hulsey. I'm CEO of IronPath and your host for today's event. First, let's go through a few housekeeping items. All participants are in listen-only mode. Today's session will be recorded and circulated to all registrants. Thank you for joining in for the live session. Please submit your questions as we go along, and we will try to address them on the fly. We will also have a dedicated Q&A section at the end of the presentation. And finally, we will send you a brief 1-minute survey immediately following today's event. Please share your feedback. Today's webinar is brought to you by a consortium of IT service providers serving your local community. Thank you to our sponsors. ACCI is headquartered in Birmingham, Alabama. Amnet is based in Colorado Springs, Colorado. IT Synergy serves the Phoenix and Denver metro areas. And Sagacent is headquartered in San Jose, California, serving Silicon Valley and the greater San Francisco Bay Area. Now let me introduce our guest speaker, James Carroll. James is a founder and principal at Hackett Cyber. He is a professionally trained ethical hacker and penetration tester. When not hacking into his clients' networks, James is a frequent speaker and trainer at cybersecurity industry events. He also speaks frequently at industry events with non-technical senior management and leaders. James, welcome to the call.
Thanks, Ted. Excited to be here.
All right, let's do this. Let me hand you control. All right.
Ted, like I said before, man, we're getting good at this tech thing. I think we found a niche.
All right. Okay, I can see your screen well.
Cool. Awesome. Well, we'll get this party started then. So I got a good presentation. This is actually pretty new content. We just put it together. I call it Friend Zoned, and I was talking to Ted before, and Ted's like, you might want to explain why you spell like that. Like we want to make sure they know that you're college educated and you know how to spell. Like that's probably not a bad idea. So in hacker world, owned, like, and it's actually funny because like a lot of tools that we use as hackers, like when you get admin, it'll actually just say, instead of you got admin, it'll say you owned, like you owned them or owned. So owned means is you like basically took control of that account, you took control of that computer. So we did a little play on words there with friend zoned and owned. And that's really what this presentation goes over is a lot of different ways that hackers are targeting organizations in response to a lot of the sophisticated defenses that some companies are using. So that's the goal today. We got, as always, a lot of really good fun war stories we're going to go over, cool methods and tricks that hackers are using. And really, the goal of this is to educate and say, hey, this is how you can defend against these types of attacks. So we'll jump right in with the introduction. Now, I'm James Carroll, founder, and I guess you can call me the chief hacker at Hackett Cyber. What we do is we're an offensive security penetration testing firm. What that means is companies hire us to hack them before they get hacked. That's the most simplest way to put it. So we go in, find the deficiencies, find the gaps, tell them, hey, you need to do X, Y, and Z to prevent against these types of attacks, and then they go or work with their technology provider to remediate that. On the right there, that's my favorite coworker, Duke. I always have to introduce Duke because I put notes on all my doors when I do these. I'm like, don't knock, don't come in my driveway, because Duke likes to make an appearance and bark. So it's rude if someone might make an appearance, I don't introduce them. So I have to introduce Duke. He's a great coworker. He's really low maintenance. I pay him basically in snacks and greenies. So can't ask for much more than that. And I always love going over the story of how I started hacking. And Ted knows this story very well, I'm sure. But it all started in, when I was, I think probably 8th grade. So that was 2006 or 2007. And a video game came out called Halo 2. And my whole life, I've been a gamer. I attribute a lot of when you network with people in this industry, a lot of them attribute gaming to, their passion in tech and their passion in security, because back then there was a lot of insecure games and insecure protocols that were in use. So Halo 2 was my game, and that came out, and we go to school, me and my friends, we get home, and the first thing we do is, hey, we gotta get in Halo, and we gotta play. And you could play it online, and those were the first games I played online against people from all over the world. So how that game worked is the more you won, the higher rank you would get. So the lowest rank was 1, the highest rank was 50. So if you were level 50, you were like a god amongst the nerds, right? You're like, oh my god, that guy's a 50 in Halo 2. Like, I wonder what his life is like. It's got to be so awesome. So like everyone wanted to be the highest level in Halo 2. Well, the issue with me is that I was like probably like a level 20, 23. Like I wasn't that great. But my friends were like 30s and 35s. I remember one of my friends was like a 42, and I'm like, I want to get that high. I want to be like him, but I'm not good. So what I did is I started Googling, and back then it might have been Yahoo. I don't even know, but I found this forum called Seven Sins, and I went to it, and this guy had a post like how to win every game in Halo, and I'm like, well, what's this all about? And I started reading it, and he had like step-by-step instructions on how to win. And what I learned after reading it a little bit, and I didn't really know what I was doing, but at the time I was performing a denial of service attack. And we joined games, and I joined a game with me and 4 other people. And what I could do is I could basically turn off their internet. So I'd find what their IP address was. I'd use a software. It was called Low Orbit Ion Cannon. It was actually developed by a hacker group called Anonymous. Download the software on my dad's computer, download all the other tools, and join the game, followed the instructions, click the button, and next thing you know, they quit out of the game and their internet got turned off. And we do it like, I mean, I probably turned off thousands of people's internet, and you automatically won because they quit out. If they quit, they lose. So when you turn the internet off, they can't join you, they automatically quit. So that's how I first started getting into this. Now, I mean, back then it might have been a felony. Now it's definitely a felony. So like, don't, like, Ted, I know we record this, but like, don't send it to the feds or anything. So I don't want any more problems than we might already have. But this is the how I got into hacking story. This is a picture of some of the tools that we used to use back in the day. Like Cain and Abel was like one of the like premier hacking tools. Zone Alarm Pro, that was actually the firewall we used to use to block IP addresses. So if we lagged someone out and they tried to connect back, we would just block them so they couldn't do it. So yeah, that's to me, it was really crazy how I'm like, here I am, 16-year-old kid, don't really know anything about hacking, and I followed a forum from some guy who just said, click this, click this, click this, do this, and I could do that. I could turn anyone's internet off that I wanted to. It was just really fascinating to me. So that's how I got into it. That's where the passion started, and here we are today. So what I also want to cover is how I got, my first experience with a scam. And the reason I'm talking about this is, during this presentation, we're going to talk a lot about social media, social engineering, the things that happen on those platforms. And one thing that happens are scams. And I remember the first scam was the first social engineering tactic that I've ever seen implemented was on my Xbox right around the time where I started hacking. And I remember I was talking to my friend, Mark, we played Halo together. He's like, hey, this weird thing just happened. Justin sent me this message, and we know Justin really well. He's like, he sent me this message, like, message to all friends, like, everyone go to this link, you can get 1,600 Microsoft points for free. And he's telling me this, and I'm like, man, I don't know, like, that just doesn't seem like. He's like, well, we know Justin, like, it's got to be legit. Here we are, 16-year-old kids. He's like, I'm just gonna go to the site, and he went to the site, and the site was a Microsoft site. It said log in with your username and password. He logs in. About 20 minutes later, Mark's voice changed to someone in India. And I'm like, Mark, did you pick up an accent in the last 20 minutes? And someone hijacked his account, logged into his account, stole everything on his account, and then messaged all his friends with this same message. Like, hey, I got these 1,600 free points. So this happens, 2 times, 3 times, 4 times, and they just gets on and on and on. It's the snowball effect. And this was like really early stage phishing, right? This was exactly what it was. And I remember what they did is they would like charge, like, we had our parents' credit cards in these accounts, and they were charging like hundreds of dollars to his parents' credit card, like buying merchandise and points. And his mom's like, Mark, why are you charging so much money? He's like, oh, my account got hacked. And she's like, what? How did that happen? And then I'm like, yeah, your son's an idiot. I don't really know any other way to say it. But yeah, that was like early on, and like obviously now this is what we do for a living, right? Like we fish companies all the time. But I always go back to this story because it's just crazy that, like, a 16-year-old kid gets fished on Xbox Live. You don't even know what it's called at that time. You're just like, yeah, dude, you got scammed, right? It was just really, really funny. And that's kind of what Angry Mark looked like back in the day when he got scammed. I don't know if that's entirely accurate, but that's the picture I play in my mind when I think of Mark on the microphone when he told me he got scammed. So figured I'd share that visual with all of you guys. So we're going to go into what I like to call the static threat landscape. And what I mean by static is it's the threats that haven't really changed over the last 15 years. And the big ones are phishing, right? Phishing is always a constant. Will it go away someday? Maybe. But, from what we've seen, it's only gotten worse. It's only gotten more sophisticated. I mean, it's crazy that people still fall victim to the Nigerian prince fishes, let alone some more sophisticated ones like the ones you're seeing on screen right now. But I have friends that work at banks, and they're like, you won't believe how many people come in and say that they won the Nigerian lottery and they got to wire money. Like it's crazy. You won't believe how many people come in and say that they met a guy who's in Denmark and he's really handsome and he needs money to fly over here, and they've been talking to him for 2 years. Like, these are romance scams. Happens all the time. People are still falling victim to that. Then people are falling victim to these ones. So these are really common ones that we see even still. Like, the top one's from 2017, but it really is, it increases every year, is like fake invoices. So like fake payment remittance scam. So if you go on LinkedIn and you figure out like, okay, this business does work with this business, sending a fake invoice like this, they log in, right? Might send bank details, might wire information or wire funds or something like that. A very popular scam. Then you get things that are a little bit more sophisticated. So that bottom one, what attackers are doing is they're actually taking legitimate Amex, Amazon, UPS emails, cloning those emails and changing a couple things around and then sending it to people, right? So if they know, I mean, a lot of people have Amex accounts, right? You get a notification, it's like, hey, like something in your account's under review, or hey, there's a disputed charge or an update to your account. People are going to be like, what's going on here? They click to review it and might tell them to log in. That's obviously not going to American Express. It's going somewhere else. And when that happens, when that goes somewhere else, bad things happen. So this is kind of what we've been seeing. This has been static over the years. Phishing is always a constant. Even when we do our forensic analysis or any kind of incident response, we're seeing phishing really taking the reins in terms of how attackers are getting in. But we are seeing an increase and a little bit of a change in this. And historically speaking, why has phishing worked so well? Well, there's a couple of reasons, right? One is because people are Swiss cheese. In the past 10 years, I mean, 10 years ago, people just weren't trained, and as much as I like to have fun and say like, oh yeah, it's people's fault that they're getting phished, to an extent, it's kind of the company's fault, I mean, 10 years ago, there wasn't, LMS programs with social engineering and employee awareness training. People just weren't conditioned and trained enough to say, hey, this is a threat, this is how to detect it, this is what to do, this is the protocol, this is the policy. Things have changed since then. The other thing is, a lot of companies' network security look like this. This is a door held shut by a Cheeto, right? It's enough to look secure. Maybe it'll withstand a nice light wind, but the second you poke on that or you start looking at it and really like, hey, what's behind this? It's just gonna come right apart, and that door is gonna open. And a lot of companies, I mean, even today, we'll see, occasionally companies in unregulated industries that their security is a lot like a Cheeto on a door lock, a lot like that. So that's the reason why a lot of this stuff has worked. But in defense to that, there's a lot of things that have changed in the past 10 years. And one thing is spam filters. So, if you use Mimecast, Proofpoint, any kind of spam filter like that, people always complain like, oh, I hate Mimecast or I hate Proofpoint because spam keeps getting in. I'm like, imagine if you didn't have that, how much spam would get in. Like, have you ever gone into your old Yahoo account from 15 years ago and saw how much spam you got, like gone through the spam folder? I logged into like one of my first Yahoo accounts when I was in middle school. And I'm like, let me just look at the spam folder. And I won more lotteries than I think I didn't know that many lotteries existed. I'm like, I'm the richest man in the world. I'm going to retire. I'm going to sell the company. We're good to go. I don't need to work anymore. But, those filters, they block a lot of stuff and they get better. And, they really do, even when we do phishing now versus when we used to do social engineering 3-4 years ago, it's really hard to bypass those spam filters, especially if we're sending it to an entire company. So they do a lot of really good work. The second thing is technology. So, I remember when I first started doing pen testing like 9 years ago, I could run almost any executable I wanted on a machine. Like I was talking to one of my engineers about this, like, man, remember the days when we didn't have to like bypass antivirus? It just like ran, like everything we did just worked. Like there would be no alerts. Like we would use Meterpreter's PS exec and get onto machines. Like it was awesome. Like the engagements were so much shorter. There was so much less work. Well, now we have things like Carbon Black and CrowdStrike and Barracuda and /Next and all these other technologies out there that help protect inboxes and help protect endpoints where, those old methods are not going to work and they're going to get alerted. You got to spend some serious time trying to evade it. And sometimes you just got to sit down at the end of the day and say, hey, we tried everything and we can't evade this. So the technology are changing. Those endpoints are becoming more and more protected against these threats. When we talk about the people perspective, we got training programs, continuous phishing programs like Wombat and KnowBe4 and Fin, which are basically automated phishing training, phishing and training modules. So, it's basically like automated fire drills. So, you think about, like when I was a kid, we used to have fire drills at school. We had fire drills at my house. We would know what to do. This is like a fire drill every week. So it's like, hey, we're going to test you. What do you do when this happens? Are you responding properly? If you're not, okay, you failed the fish test. Well, now you had to go through continuous training, another training module. So this is really helping people. We've seen a pretty big decline in the amount of employees that click on our fishes because of these really good technologies that are out there now. Compliance requirements, and this is driving really the entire industry. And we got things like CCPA if you're in California, New York State, NYDFS, PCI if you're handling any kind of credit cards, ISO 27K, HIPAA if you're in healthcare. And these requirements aren't getting easier and they're not getting narrower. They're covering more and more people, more and more industries, more and more verticals, and their requirements are increasing. So this is driving a lot of people to say, hey, well, now we have to comply to NYDFS, or now we have to comply to CCPA. So we do need to spend the money, the time, money, and effort to become more secure and to increase our security program. And this drives also a lot of the products as well. Well, now we need more product. Now we need more managed services. It's really just a snowball effect. The one thing that I'm seeing more of right now, especially for businesses that have never had a pen test before, is cyber insurance requirements. So, it's pretty much it's pretty much ubiquitous that everyone needs cyber insurance. You don't want to be out millions of dollars if something happens. Well, the carriers now are saying, hey, here's a checklist. If you answer no to some of that stuff, it's a deal breaker. Like, I know for a fact they had companies that answered no to two-factor authentication, like, oh yeah, we don't have it, and they're like, yeah, no, you're not getting coverage. A big piece of that is like, what's your AV? Do you have two-factor? What programs are you using? Do you do continuous training? Do you do a pen test? So some of these companies are like, we don't even like, what's a pen test? Like, do we have to like test big pens at our desk? Like, we have no idea what that is. And I'm like, no, they email me like, hey, what's a pen test? I'm telling them. And, we're doing a lot of first timers pen tests because of these kind of requirements. But this is what's changed the industry. And this is why companies are more secure now than they were 5 years ago, or at least a large contributing factor is a combination of all of these things. And the insurance carriers out there that are requiring it, like Lloyd's, Travelers, AIG, Corvus, right? A lot of the big name ones. And there's also vendor requirements too. So if you're doing work with a Bank of America or a big financial institution, they're going to come back to you and say, hey, we're entrusting you with a lot of our customer data. So what are you doing to protect it? Here's a checklist, right? Fill it out, let us know. And those are things that you have to take seriously. The money in cybersecurity. This is something I like to talk about. This is from Crunchbase. Crunchbase they're like a venture capital analysis firm, right? They analyze a lot of different VC firms and startups, how much money is going into it. In 2020, almost $8 billion in cybersecurity. So there's definitely no shortage of money being thrown at this industry. And the thing that always fascinates me when I look at this number is, you think about like this cyber arms race. It's like there's all these great products and tools and services that are coming out, but there's someone in China with an 8-year-old laptop that can somehow spend enough time and resources to bypass that. And that's always crazy to think about. It's kind of like the Vietnam War, right? It's like you had the U.S. with all these tools, with all these weapons and things, and you got the Viet Cong soldiers that are hiding behind trees and being effective in that way. It's really not a whole lot different, but luckily a lot of these tools are really good. Like, we've had the experience of testing a lot of them, and they work very well. In the past, not so much. We work actually with a lot of the VPs of engineering for some of those tools and say, hey, we found this, can you go in and fix it? And they'll do it. And that's the one thing I love about this industry is everyone's like super aligned to making it more secure and making the products better and the services better. All right, so we're going to switch gears a little bit and talk about the newer threat landscape. And I talk about this in the term of IA, which means initial access. So that's the initial foothold that attackers are getting into those networks. And It's social engineering, but it's really social media engineering. So we're seeing a huge uptick in things like social engineering for dating sites, platforms, social media sites, Teams, Zoom, LinkedIn, right? All of those really great cloud products that people started using when the pandemic hit. Attackers are now saying, well, if we can't get through a spam filter, what if I just send them a message on LinkedIn, right? There's no spam filter for LinkedIn. It's definitely not as good as Mimecast or Proofpoint. So let's start doing that. Think about social media, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. I mean, I can look at my Facebook messages and find at least 24 things in the past 3 weeks that didn't hit spam, that were clearly spam. So they're not doing as good of a job as corporate mail filters are in terms of protecting that inbox. So attackers are going forth and utilizing that. And we're going to have examples for each one of these coming up here. So we'll do a pretty deep dive into each one, and some of them are super creative and super interesting, and I'm like, wow, that's actually a really, really good idea. Like Teams phishing, right? So what we're seeing is, even Microsoft Outlook 365 de facto spam is pretty effective. And what hackers are doing is they're doing two different things. One is they're still targeting the inbox, but they're doing a Teams-based phish, and they're saying, hey, they'll mimic something. Maybe it's your employee, maybe it's your boss. Hey, this is a Teams message. It says, please submit this report by Wednesday. You click reply in Teams. You're like, oh, I didn't see this on my Teams. Let me see if I hit reply. If I go to that chat thread, tells you to log in. You log in. That doesn't go to Microsoft. That goes to the attacker. Now, if you don't have two-factor or other protections in place, that attacker controls your Microsoft account. On the right is something we see somewhat often is a Teams-based phishing message. So they'll add you to like a project, like, oh, this is, Project Alpha, you're invited to it. You join it. It's, someone who impersonated your boss or an employee, and it's like, hey, as part of this project, you need to fill out this form, click this link and fill it out and upload it. You click the link, it downloads malware. Bad things can start happening then. So, and this is kind of the common theme that we're seeing across not just Teams, but any chat-based platform. Even Zoom, right? I mean, Zoom made big headlines when COVID hit because of what was called Zoom bombing. I don't know if you guys remember that. That was, people were guessing Zoom links and URLs and logging in and sharing the screen and doing all sorts of more nuisance-related things. But Zoom phishing is a real problem. And what attackers do is they can register for legitimate Zoom accounts. Like if your boss's name is, Austin Smith, they'll make like austinsmith@gmail.com, create a Zoom account, send you a Zoom invite, and for you, it just says Austin Smith wants to meet for Zoom, right? Maybe they say, hey, it's an annual review. Oh man, I got to join my annual review. You jump on, it's got a picture of Austin. They'll text in the chat and say, hey, I'm having audio issues. Just download this annual review document and review it, and we'll talk about it in 15 minutes when I figure it out. You, knowing not knowing any better, downloads that document that contains malware, and now it's over. Your computer's been infected. The same thing happens with chat, right? Just like Teams chat, they have Zoom chat. Anyone on Zoom can message anyone on Zoom, and the spam capabilities and the filtering is not as good as an email. So we're seeing attackers impersonating that and then trying to get in through Zoom. So it's a very real threat that we're seeing. Slack is I like to say Slack's the millennial Teams, right? It's a chat app. In California, Ted, I know in San Francisco, Slack's huge out there. A lot of startup-based companies and SaaS-based companies, but we're seeing a lot of Slack phishing. And Slack's awesome because it has so many great integrations. So like we used to use Slack at one of my old companies, and it was sick because I could say, oh, I'm going to put HubSpot in here, my Google Calendar in here, my chat in here, right? Everything was controlled by Slack. And then when I started my day, I would just go look at my Slack, see everything that was going on. I'm like, I'm good to go. I can see everything in Slack. The issue with those integrations is what attackers did that I actually found really smart, and something that we might reproduce here in the future when we're targeting organizations, is creating fake service accounts. So if you connect your Google Calendar to Slack, what attackers do is they go, well, I'll just create an account called Google Calendar as the name, and I'll just send them a link. I'll upload my logo to the same logo as Google Calendar. And I'll say, hey, please connect your Google Calendar account. It's been disconnected. And I was thinking like, man, if I was not knowing any better and I had Slack open and I saw that, I would just click the link and usually just relog into your Google account. Well, that's what they do. People see it, they click the link, relog into their Google account. Those credentials are obviously not going to Google, they're going to an attacker. and they're gaining access to that. And when you gain access to the calendar, right, you gain access to not just the calendar, the email, the contacts, right, all of that you'll gain access to. And at that point, that attacker can control your inbox and your calendar, which is never good. Instagram-based phishing, this is really popular. It's more on the personal side. So if you have a personal Instagram, or maybe you have kids that use Instagram a lot, this is a really real threat vector. We've seen a couple of cases recently where business Instagrams are compromised, and they happened to a couple different ones. One that happened a couple years back was called the Hot List 95. It was this Instagram account that would email people and message them on Instagram and say, hey, your picture ranked number 35 on the Hot List 95. Click this link to see what people are voting for. They click it. It says log into Instagram, right? It's obviously not going to Instagram. It's going to a malicious page. They'll log into that, and then once they do that, the attacker controls that Instagram account. And from a personal account, right? Yeah, some bad stuff can be done. They can message friends, but if it's a business account and you have customers as your followers on Instagram, and they start getting messages from your business with malware, that's not good. You don't want that to happen. So we're seeing this, especially as social media evolves. Social media is becoming bigger and bigger. There's more and more influencers these days, and these attacks are becoming more and more common. Tinder phishing. Now I'm a little old for Tinder. I'm married, but I got a lot of single friends, and when I was initially doing research for these slides, I asked one of them, I call him a serial Tinder offender. He's been on Tinder for, it seems like, a decade now, for good reason, man. The kid's just, I don't know what he's doing. Lives with his parents, 30 years old, a lot of cats. I'm like, Tinder's your place. That's your calling. Really good friend of mine. I'm just laughing because I can see, just thinking about what he would say when he watches this recording. But I'm like, hey, is it true that like there's a lot of bots on Tinder? He's like, dude, it's dominated by bots. I'm like, well, what do they try to do? What are they doing? He's like, well, it's always attractive females. And I'm like, well, how do you know if they're bots? Like, first of all, they're way out of my league. Like, they're 11 out of 10. So I'm like a 4. He's like, there's no way they would match with me. I'm like, that's a pretty good telltale sign. He's like, they also try to get you to do things. Like, one is like, this was an example of one that he had. And he's like, yeah, they try to get you to do these Tinder match verification checks. Like, oh yeah, let's go out and get drinks, but before you do that, can you verify your identity on tindermatchcheck.com? And they'll go to it, and it's like log in with with 3 forms of social media. So like LinkedIn, MySpace, Tinder, whatever. And then they control all those accounts. So it's completely spammy. And he actually sent me one the other day that was like clearly a bot. And it was like a bot message, and he responded and goes, you're a bot. And they responded, they go, no, I'm not. And it's like, wow, the bot actually responded with like, I'm not a bot. I just thought it was hilarious, because most of the time they're just automated messages that keep going and going and going. But yeah, I mean, social media and these dating sites are just hotbeds for that kind of activity. And then there's what's called dating extortion or dating sextortion. And this is something that we've dealt with on a corporate level so many times. So there's actually a Netflix documentary about it called The Tinder Swindler. I think it's out. I haven't watched it. I'm not a big TV person, but this is one I would watch. But it's about a guy who's on Tinder who makes millions of dollars doing romance scams. So he'll match like 40, 50, 60-year-old women. He'll have this big persona of a wealthy, affluent guy. They'll say, hey, I want to fly to see you, but my money's being held up in foreign bank accounts. They'll send him money, right? And he'll keep this thing going for years and years and years. He made millions of bucks doing it. But one of the more dangerous things that we're seeing on Tinder is, you match with someone, then they start requesting explicit pictures. And, a lot of people on their Tinder profile, they have a lot of personal details, like where they're from, where they work, right? Maybe a link to their Instagram or another site. It doesn't take a lot of research to figure out where this person works, where their LinkedIn is, who their boss is, who their friends are, who their colleagues are. And once that person gets an explicit picture, the whole tone changes. They start extorting you, and they'll say, hey, if you don't send me $5,000, I'm gonna send this picture to your coworkers. I'm gonna send it to your parents. I'm gonna send it to your boss. What will they think of you then? And we've seen people do really, really crazy things to avoid that, especially married people. Right? If you're married and like, I'm gonna send this picture to your wife or your husband, you don't want that happening. There was one case I dealt with just a couple years back, and it was a friend of a friend, and he worked for a defense contractor. He had a security clearance, and he's like, hey, I know you're friends with Jake, but this is what happened to me. What do I do? And I'm like, well, this is reportable. Like, you have to report this. Like, why do I have to report it? I'm like, well, if your company finds out and you don't say anything, they can assume that, well, this person has something over you, a power, and they could use it to get government secrets, right? They could use it to extort you for company related things. He's like, that's a good point. So he actually ended up reporting it to them. Nothing bad happened, which was great, but these are things you want to avoid. You don't want to go into your employer and be like, hey, I was on Tinder and I sent an explicit picture and they're extorting me, and just wanted to let you know, so I'm not going to, sell the latest radar we made for the government. Things you don't want to do. There's a lot of crazy stories. There's actually a whole Reddit called Sextortion. You can go in and just stories of people that had this happen to them, what they did. And I always was under the belief that these people never actually send the pictures to the friends and colleagues and coworkers. But what I learned on this is they actually do. They'll send those pictures. So be very, very careful on dating sites and anything like that. LinkedIn phishing is also huge. This is the #1 social media site we're seeing phishing occur on, and it comes mostly through potential job applicants and recruiters. And if I had $1 for every fake recruiter that friended me on LinkedIn, man, I don't think I need to work anymore. But it happens every single day. And what they'll do is, this was big during the COVID-19 pandemic when the vaccines were coming out. What recruiters were doing is they were finding people that were head scientists of Pfizer and Moderna. They said, hey, I got a great opportunity for you. It's going to pay $650,000 a year. You can work from home. Here's the job rec, and they'll send them a PDF. When that person opens that PDF or that Word document, infects their computer, and then it was a Chinese-based scam, they would get in and then steal all that data surrounding the vaccine, the research, all of that stuff. That happens a lot. There was one really popular malware and phishing campaign called More Eggs. And what More Eggs was a fake resume for hiring managers. So attackers would actually go on LinkedIn, find the hiring manager for a job, and they'd create a website. Like, let's say I was applying for a job, I'd make it james'sresume.com. What they would do is say, hey, Lizzie, you got a great opportunity, would love to, potentially have an interview. My resume is at james'sresume.com. You can go and see it. The hiring manager goes to the link. That link says, oh, this is a Microsoft Word document. In order to view this, you got to sign in with Microsoft Word. They sign in with their account, with their work account, and then that becomes compromised. And, the attacker has access to their inbox, right? Because all that stuff lives in Microsoft's cloud, and they can do a bunch of potentially bad things with that level of access. And the one common denominator we see is every kind of social media-based phishing like this is they all try to get them to do a couple different things. One is click a link, enter a password, download a malicious document, and disclose information that could be used somewhere else. These are the common denominators. So when you go back and you say, well, is this malicious or is this not malicious? These three things are almost always common denominators for every single attack that's going to occur, especially on a social media platform. There's actually a couple very interesting tools out there that are free, they're open source, and they help attackers generate these malicious documents. So one's called Evil Clippy. Remember, like in Word, I don't know, it was like 2003, there was that little clip art or the paperclip guy that would like throw out like random tips to you. Well, they did a play on that called Evil Clippy, right? Put an evil face on him. And what that tool does is it'll create documents that help bypass antivirus. So if I want to send Ted a malicious Word document, but I know Ted's using CrowdStrike or some next-gen AV, I could potentially use Evil Clippy to encode my payload I'm sending him so it doesn't detect it, and then he opens it and I get access to his computer. The other thing we're seeing is more as a service type crimeware. So you have like software as a service, you have pen testing as a service, you have all these as a service based service offerings. And it was only a matter of time before a criminal said, this is a great business venture, right? We can use our very well built criminal enterprise technology and lease it to other criminals. And that's exactly what they're doing. So if anyone wanted to say, hey, you know what, I want to phish 500 companies, but I don't want to build the infrastructure. I don't want to build the sites. I don't want to build the malware. I don't want to build the emails. You can lease on the dark web phishing as a service called Evil Proxy for $35 a month in Bitcoin. and they'll gladly spin up your own little instance of it. You can log into it. You can start sending out phishing emails. You can start stealing credit cards, doing whatever you want. They give you all the technology to do it. All you do is pick who your targets are. And this is becoming a very, very lucrative criminal enterprise. And we're seeing a lot of this happening. If you have, and I had to touch on this because we've seen a lot of this stuff in forensics, but a lot of people, especially, people that aren't American, I know in China and India, these are common, like phone apps like WhatsApp, Discord, Telegram. A lot of malicious activity occurs on those apps, especially Telegram. Telegram, it's end-to-end encrypted. Basically means that if someone does a forensic analysis of the phone, it's going to be very hard to recover that data. So attackers try to target people with Telegram, send them phishing emails so they know, hey, if someone falls victim to it, they might never find out who we are or how they did it because all of this is going to be encrypted. So the real danger with that is when people are using these types of apps or non-approved apps on their corporate devices, which is something we never like to see. And this falls into the line of what I like to call blurred lines, right? Which blurs the personal life and the work life. And this was a direct result of the COVID-19 pandemic. We see more and more people doing personal things on their work computers. I know, Ted, in past webinars, we talked about my infamous story of a kid playing Fortnite on his mom's work computer and getting the whole thing infected and destroying the corporate network. I mean, this can take place on any app, right? On any social media app. And I think, I haven't worked in an actual, cubicle office setting in quite a while, but I remember when I was in college as an intern, I'd be sitting there and I might throw up Facebook, but I wouldn't do it for long because someone walked by. I didn't want them seeing what was on my screen. Like, you're always kind of looking over your shoulder. Well, now you have your work computer at your house. There's no one to hide anything from, right? I mean, I can hide stuff from Duke all day long, but he wouldn't care what I'm doing on my work computer. But you don't have that fear anymore. So people are doing more and more personal things on their work computer, and a lot of things might seem benign, like social media, but if you click on a link in social media site and you get that work computer infected, that spiders to your entire work network, it's not a good thing, right? And they will do incident response and they will find out who got the entire network locked up with ransomware, and they'll figure out it was your computer and you were on social media. And you don't want that. You don't want to be known as Kelly, that was the person that was on her Tinder on her work computer and got the whole network infected. Like, that happens. Every time that happens at companies. They talk about that, and you don't want that happening. So, and this is exactly how it happens, right? You go on your work computer, then all of a sudden, now it's your computer that's breached, but now it becomes a security breach. And sometimes it's a reportable event. Like, now that company that you're working for, if they're under any kind of compliance requirement, they have to report, hey, this stuff happened. Oh, how'd it happen? Well, you see, right? And now that, that lives within, the HIPAA auditors, whatever auditor or compliance requirement your company is going to fall under. So you don't want that to happen. So we're going to go over forms of compromise here. So now, knowing everything that we've learned in these past slides, we're going to say, how do we chain this stuff together and compromise networks? Well, one of the most common ones we see is called business email compromise. And what business email compromise is attackers using a platform, sometimes social media, to gain access to an email account, and they'll lay dormant, sometimes for months. And what they'll do is they'll sit there and wait for any kind of financial transaction. So to do that, they do a lot of recon. They figure out, okay, who's the controller, right? Who's in accounts receivable, who's in accounts payable, who's the CFO, what's their email. All they gotta do is get into that inbox, and then they create forwarding rules. So they say, okay, anything with the word payment, invoice, ACH, wire, that's not gonna go to this guy's inbox. That's actually gonna go to us. So they sit there and wait, and when that comes in, they hijack that conversation. We had this happen to a customer. It was a large construction company and a very large gas station chain. And what happened was the hackers gained access to the construction company's CFO's inbox, lied dormant in there for 7 months, and waited and waited and waited. And they saw in the emails that they just won a huge contract for millions of dollars to build out all these new locations for the gas station chain. So like, well, patience is going to pay here. So what happened was they waited for that wire to come through, and when that wire said, okay, well, what bank account do you want it to wire to? They intercepted that, responded, and said, hey, we're going to use our international bank account. Here's the information for it. They wired $2 million to the hacker's international bank account, which was, I think it was the second largest incident that I've ever been a part of. The other one was a couple $1 million more. but it was huge. And one of the things that came of this was a little bit of a blame game. Well, they're like, well, the construction company said, well, we're not at fault. It's the gas station that's at fault because they wired it to an offshore bank. Like, they should never wire money to an offshore bank. And the gas station, like, well, the construction company's email got compromised, which is why we wired it to the offshore bank. So it was kind of a big deal. And they went back and forth for a while, like, who's responsible for this? At the end of the day, the construction company was like, yeah, we're just going to write this off because we got 14 more locations to build out, and it's a big contract for us. So they actually took the hit for it. But yeah, this is the kind of stuff that happens when the initial compromise happens through social media. They get access to an inbox. Bad stuff like this starts happening. A lot of fraud occurs then. This is one that I can almost guarantee a lot of people that are watching this webinar have experienced, and this is the infamous gift card fraud. This happens. I had a customer recently called me up, small startup. They hired a new engineer out of Brooklyn. He was an intern, and he goes, hey, got something that happened weird. My intern bought $1,600 in gift cards, and we didn't tell him to. I'm like, well, you're gonna pay him back? They're like, no. I'm like, well, why not? He's like, because it's his fault. I'm like, well, show me what's going on. So he just wanted like a sanity check on like what I thought. So he sent me the text messages, and what happened was this intern posted on LinkedIn that he started a new company, had his cell phone number in his LinkedIn profile. Attacker saw that and then texted him as the CEO and was like, hey, hope you're doing well. Let me know if you get this message. And that's like the sniff test, right? If they respond like, hey, yeah, I got your message, then it's like they smell the blood in the water. It's like game over at that point. So what the purported CEO told him was like, hey, man, I'm at a presentation. I'm doing this thing for this client, but I'm supposed to give out gift cards. Like, can you go to the store and buy me 3 eBay gift cards for $200 a piece? And the kid goes, okay, sure. Goes to the store, buys the gift card, scratches off the code, sends him the picture. And the guy goes, all right, stand by at the store, wait for me to confirm them. And he goes, hey, are you still at the store? He's like, well, I went back to school and it's raining out, but I'm still there. He's like, okay. He's like, I need more gift cards. So now he's like, this kid did it once. He's probably going to do it again. He's like, well, how many do you need? He's like, I need 5 more. So $1,000 in gift cards. And the kid's like, well, I don't have that much in my account. Do you want me to use the business card? And like, it's just, I don't know why an intern has a business card, but that's none of my business. But he's like, oh yeah, go ahead, use the business card. So he buys 5 more gift cards and uses the business card. And they end up not paying him. They're like, hey, like, you use some on your personal card, we'll cover the business stuff, but anything you did personally, like, we're not covering that. That's a very interesting response to that. Most companies I've dealt with have at least compensated the employee, like, hey, yeah, we didn't train you or whatever. But I thought that was rather interesting. These are the types of LinkedIn posts they target, right? So, I do it as well. I hire a new employee. I have my social media team go on and announce it, but they'll go and they'll post, companies like, hey, we're so excited to have Sheila on board. She's great. As an attacker, I know Sheila's new. I know she probably doesn't know the CEO too well. I know she works remotely just based on her location, and I can target her using these kind of gift card scams. And I was talking to my friend who works at an investment advisory firm. This was like 2 weeks ago. And he was training a new employee they just hired. They made the social media post, and it's like 11 o'clock, and the employee starts putting on his jacket. He's like, where are you going? He's like, oh, Dale shot me a text message. He told me you'd buy some gift cards. He's like, out at a conference, he's supposed to give them out. He's like, who? Dale? He's like, yeah, Dale would not tell you to do that. Like, let me see the text. And it wasn't Dale's number, and it was an attacker. And that, if my friend was in that office, that kid would have went out that day and bought those gift cards and sent them to him. So these are very real threats. They happen all the time. Yeah. So, and when I was doing research on this after that happened, there was a research firm that said since COVID, there's been an 820% jump in these gift card scams. And that's because of people working remote. Like, you think when you're in the office, it's really easy to just like, oh, well, Dale's over in that. I'll just go see if Dale's in his office right now and talk to him about it. When you're remote, you don't know where people are. Like, I don't even know where half my employees are during the week. I don't know if they're working on their house, if they're on vacation working, if they're in a beach house. I have no idea. And I think that's kind of the common, theme for a lot of these remote workers. And that really plays into hackers' hands, especially for scams like that. These are, so this is called smishing or SMS phishing. These are actually text messages I pulled from my phone in the past week. So you can see, like, I get tons of these. I'm assuming, I don't know why they target me. I'm assuming everyone gets these amount, this many phishing or smishing emails or messages. Maybe I'm wrong, but you can see they're like, if these went to my email address, they would get blocked immediately. But through a text message, not so much. And attackers know that. That's why they're targeting that. So you can see like a couple of Amazon security alerts, like, oh, we blocked a login from Japan. And, a lot of people would see this and say, well, I didn't do that. I better click on this link and see what's going on. They log in with their Amazon account, an attacker hijacks it, and now they have access to credit cards. They can buy whatever they want. They can change shipping addresses, all sorts of things. The USPS postal stuff, like, hey, there's a package for you and it can't be delivered. Click this link to see what's going on. I mean, I get so much stuff on Amazon. I don't even know. Like, sometimes I just go to my door and there's 8 packages out there. I'm like, I don't know what I bought today. I don't know what this is. So yeah, these are real threats. And like, as we worked more and more remote, especially during COVID, everyone was buying stuff online. People were getting slaughtered with these messages. On the bottom right is it's a bank. I don't use that bank, but we notice unusual transactions, confirmed to regain access. And of course, it's saying it's M&T Bank and it's like centromedicoelohim.com. I mean, I would be like, yeah, it's not the bank, but people fall victim to this stuff. They're still falling victim to the Nigerian prince scam. They would get killed with this stuff, So they do it because it's successful. And these were all stuff I got in 1 week, in the past week, which is just insane. Maybe they knew I was doing this presentation. Like, we want to give them really good material, so we're just going to bomb them with text messages so we can blow us up on Ted's stream there. So who knows? And then, of course, the IRS scam, right? This is called vishing. And if you think an IRS office looks like this, where it's basically an Indian call center, that's not what the IRS offices look like. Back in the day, when I used to work in a finance vertical, and I was a sole proprietor, and I used to do my own taxes. And I've done a lot of I've tried to get away with a lot of stuff, and the IRS never called me, ever. They never were like, hey, James, you said your house was a church and you don't have to pay tax on that. Never once called me to tell me that. So, they typically don't call you. You have to call them, right? They'll send you a nasty gram in the mail, but they're not going to call you. So when you get, a voicemail from like Agent Smith from Mumbai, India, and they're saying you owe 25 grand in back taxes, probably not true. And I'm going to tell you another quick story. One of my first jobs I worked at, I'll never forget, I got lunch with my coworker on my first day, and his wife called him in his car and she was crying. She's like, oh my God, I got a voicemail from the IRS. We owe 35 grand in back taxes. What am I going to do? And my buddy was like, there's no way. Like, can you send me the voicemail? So she sent it to him, and he called her back, and it was exactly this. It was a scam. And he's like, Mary, like, this is a scam. Like, how do you not know this? She's like, oh my God, I'm so relieved. She was relieved, and he was so mad. He's like, I can't believe she fell for that. Like, she's a physical therapist. She has 10 years in school. Like, how did she fall victim to that? But it just goes to show you, like, if someone like that can fall victim to it, there's a lot of people that fall victim to it. And that's why they do it, because people, they're cashing in on that. Another one that we've seen, and this was a bunch of my friends in the financial industry. One of them owns a very successful registered investment advisory firm in Florida. And I was talking to him one day when I was in Florida. I'm like, hey man, like what? I'm just curious, like, what do you guys do? You're growing really fast. I'm like, how do you, like, if I call there and I'm like, hey, this is Joe Smith, and I want to see how much money is in my account. Like, how do you validate that I am who I say I am, right? Because they're not regulated like a bank or a hospital. And he's like, we don't. Like, well, what do you mean? He's like, well, and this is what everyone says. Well, we know everyone that we know all their clients. We know their voices. I'm like, so if I work with you and I call Patty, your receptionist, she's going to say, oh yeah, I know the voice. He's like, I don't know, let's try it. So he actually hired us to do an engagement, and I went on LinkedIn, I went on Google reviews. Google reviews is a treasure trove of this kind of stuff. Found a review from Kim. Kim talked about the advisor she worked with there, how her daughter Jessica helped her find the advisor and said, you got to move and use these guys, and that they're very investment savvy. The timeline, right? So it was a year ago. So I'm like, all right, I'm going to call Kim's husband, John. Call the investment advisor firm. Hey, this is John. I'm Kim's husband. I just want to see, I didn't get in my last statement. I got a new email address. Can you just go and shoot this to my new email without asking a single question? Like, oh, okay, cool. Yeah. What is it? Well, email right to you. Email to me like, hey, by the way, can I get a copy of the application? Because my wife filled out, I don't know what she did. Like, maybe the socials are wrong. We're getting close to retirement. Sure thing, right? Sends me everything through non-encrypted email. And I'm like, when I presented the results, and he was just blown away. And they all say this. They're like, maybe that's an idea we should start doing. Maybe we should start validating identities with like last fours of socials and things like that. I'm like, yeah, you probably should. And it was all stemmed from a Google review. And that's why I always tell people, like, especially businesses, like, don't allow Google reviews. I'm dealing with 2 cases right now where uh, a scam artist went to a small business, started blowing them up with fake reviews of how they're terrible and saying, hey, if you want me to remove those reviews, it's going to be $10,000. So this stuff happens all the time. Then I reached out to my network of investment advisory firms that I work with, and I'm like, hey, if this is true at one place, it's got to be true across the board. And I asked 15 of them, I go, hey, do you guys validate like this? You have to validate customer identities when they call and request information. And only one of them said they had a policy or procedure to do that. And I'm like, this is just bananas. And they all are like, yeah, at the end, they're like, you know what, James, not a bad idea. Maybe we should start doing that. I'm like, yeah, you probably should start doing that. It's probably a good idea. All right, I only got about my last slide here. So I've been asked this all the time when I present, and people say, James, you talk about social engineering, you talk about all this stuff. What about deep fakes? Like, are deep fakes a real thing? And up until this year, I'm like, I don't think they're a threat yet. I don't think they're a threat yet. Then one of my friends told me, he's like, hey, you ever hear this thing called Synthesia? I'm like, what's that? Like, it's like a deep fake generator. They market it to businesses. I'm like, well, what's it for? He's like, you can literally upload a face of yourself and type stuff into Synthesia and it'll present it for you. So like, imagine if this presentation, I just took all of my words here, had my Syntha James come on screen, and it just starts going through the presentation. This happens, and they train employees on that. They do sales demos on that. This is what Synthesia's business is. And it's got a legitimate business use in the sense that if you're a company and you want to market, let's say in the EMEA or the Spanish region, and you don't speak Spanish, it'll convert that for you. So it'll look like you're speaking Spanish. So we can do this entire presentation in German, Spanish, whatever we want when it's all said and done. But attackers utilize this. There's another tool called Deep Face Lab. It's on GitHub, and it's super, super realistic. Like, you can see, I don't know who that guy is on the right, but I know left it's Putin. But they had a demo on YouTube, like, hey, this is Putin talking. We're going to put this other guy's face on it. And it was completely accurate. Or like, hey, here's Putin talking. We're going to change it to English, and we're going to change it into the voice of Donald Duck. And it looked completely accurate. Same thing on the bottom, right? They took an actor's face, put Elon Musk's face on it. The entire movie looked like Elon Musk was in it. You would not know any better. So attackers leverage this. And one of the most well-documented and lethal attacks was on an executive of a company called Binance. It's a cryptocurrency company. And the CCO, Patrick Hillman, what happened was an attacker created a Zoom account, invited everyone on LinkedIn, was like, hey, here's a press release. And they had a deep fake of this guy. It was him talking at another conference. They took his face, took his mechanics, put him in a different background, and had him say a bunch of stuff about the company that was completely false. And people left that meeting thinking it was him. The only reason they knew is because one guy was like, I don't know, man. Patrick just wouldn't say that stuff. So they messaged him on LinkedIn, and that message is on the right. Like, hey, can you confirm that we had that Zoom call on Thursday? He's like, that wasn't me. Like, well, someone impersonated your hologram. This is their LinkedIn profile. They said you were making a press release. And it made like national news. And this was the moment where I'm like, man, deep fakes are taking off. And this was pretty recent. This was, last month when it happened. So attackers are doing this stuff. The term we're seeing for this is called zishing, right? I don't know where they got the Z from, but I would think it'd be like dishing, or I don't know, deep fishing, deep sea fishing. I have no idea, but that's why I don't come up with these acronyms, I guess. Just real quick, right? There's a lot of news and media about this, like virtual kidnapping. So, if your kids are at school, I could take a picture of them from your Facebook, deep fake them into saying like, hey, I've been kidnapped, wire me 25 grand, or you're never going to see me again. That's been happening. There was actually a very interesting case in Pennsylvania where a woman's daughter didn't make the cheerleading team. So she took pictures of the cheerleaders, like the senior cheerleaders, and had them saying all sorts of racist and disgusting things and sent it to the school. It was like, you're going to let these girls on your team? And it was all deep faked. And it's becoming such an issue. Department of Homeland Security released a a bulletin about the increasing threat of deepfakes. So these things are happening, and they're happening at a rapid scale. All right, and that concludes the friend zone presentation. I guess Ted will field any questions that people might
Yeah.
have.
So now that everybody's completely terrified, Jace, we need about another hour probably to talk about what we do about it, but we only have 4 minutes. So let's do our best. But let's if you've got a question, please throw it into the Q&A log. Let's go with Susie's question first. She says, much of our staff information, last name, emails is openly listed on our website. We have been the victim of several hack attempts. Would you suggest limiting how much personal information is shared publicly?
Yeah, so especially if it's like raw email addresses, like a lot of companies will put like J Smith and then at instead of an at symbol. The problem is web scrapers will go in, they'll scrape that, and they'll just bomb them with phishing emails. So I always recommend like not listing emails on there. But based on your business and what you're doing, it varies. At the very least, know that, hey, these people's emails are out there, and let's say it's just executives or just the sales team. Just know that these guys are going to get more phishing emails than the rest of the company, but not a bad idea to reevaluate that and say we should just remove emails from the sites altogether.
Okay, and then a different question, also from Susie's, how can we ensure that like I think this question came in when you were going through a lot of the kind of the social media kind of phishing attacks. I mean, I think you touched on it a little bit, but what's the training for executives and all employees? How do you spot these scams of people trying to phish information from you from these non-traditional or new places like social media properties and the like? How do you spot the scams? How do you spot the phishing attacks?
Yeah, no, I think it's the same way that when we looked at phishing 8 years ago and email phishing, it's training, right? It's like if you get a message from someone that you don't know and it contains a link, don't click on it. If you get a message from someone you know and you're like, hey, this just doesn't seem like them, call them, text them, say, hey, did you send me this? Was this actually you that sent me this? Until these platforms catch on to these types of attacks and start implementing their own algorithms to check it, it's basically, we're 8 years back in phishing, right? You got to train people to say, this is a scam, this is not a scam. But the bigger thing is making sure people don't use their personal social media for work on their work computer. If they're on their personal computer, on their personal laptop and it happens, right? Yeah, it's bad, but at least your company didn't get compromised. If they're on their work computer doing this stuff and your work computer gets compromised, that's going to be a lot hairier than if just their personal computer got compromised.
Yeah, and I think why don't you talk a little bit about the importance of multi-factor authentication, because a lot of this is credential theft, and when they're using social media accounts to try to get credentials, it's to get back into somebody's Microsoft 365 email platform and that sort of thing. So talk about the importance of multi-factor authentication as a line of defense if employees fall victim to the links on social media.
Yeah, for sure. And I've always said this is if you have an extremely limited budget and you can only afford one thing, that one thing should be multi-factor authentication. If a password gets compromised and someone tries to log in, it'll prompt that user, hey, enter this code to gain access. You're like, I didn't try to log into my Office account. I didn't try to log into my VPN. And most people will be like, that wasn't me. They'll deny it, right? It'll get flagged for review. The attacker won't be able to log in. But it's super important. And like when we do phishing and when we do our social engineering attacks, it's very, very difficult. Like, I can only think of one time I ever got around two factors because it was self-implemented. They didn't implement it right. But we have a lot of partners like technology resellers and MSPs that if a customer denies multi-factor, like you're too much of a liability, we can't work with you. Like our cyber insurance requirement makes all of you have multi-factor and we can't get coverage if you don't have it. So it's super, super important. It'll stop a ton of attacks. And I think when a lot of people first implement multi-factor, they're shocked at how many times attackers can guess the right password and then get stopped by multi-factor. It will really open your eyes into like how prevalent this threat is, especially against your organization.
Right. And I think, Holly jumped in with a question saying, we use social media for work all the time on our work computers. How can not sure how we can stop using social media. I mean, it is so foundational to so many businesses to drive brand awareness and to do marketing and to find new clients. So how do you respond to that?
Yeah, no, and that's where training comes in, right? Like you have to show them like, hey, build the training program. I know I think know before it just implement a social media training program, but making sure they know these risks, right? It's like, hey, you're on social media. It's not as corporate protected as our webmail. You might get messages like this, right? This is what you might be exposed to. It's the same way you'd approach really anything in any kind of training for the company. And really, what some of our customers are doing is they're creating compensating controls around machines that are on social media. So if you have a marketing department, they're like, okay, well, the marketing department is in their own segment, right? They're on a different domain. They have different technical controls so that, yeah, we're exposing them to this, this kind of wild west of messaging, but we're also segmenting them. So if it does get infected, it can't spread to our file share and our domain controller and things like that. But yeah, I think it all starts with training and making sure that they're aware of, you're going to get targeted like this. This is how people are getting targeted, and you need to know and be able to spot this.
Yeah, and so I think we're basically out of time, folks. What I want to say is that all of the kind of defense measures that James just went through. If you are working with a managed service provider or an IT service provider as your partner in helping you manage your technology, they're going to help you weave in all of these capabilities to better defend your organization. All the companies that are sponsors for today's webinar mandate that all of their clients use multi-factor authentication. They all offer cybersecurity awareness education as a core foundational component. They're at these companies are at your beck and call to help you layer in more and more security defenses, which can really help with many of the things that James revealed today. So that's really, I think we established very clearly there's lots and lots of new ways the bad guys are trying to use to get to your employees, then get into your networks and your software tools. So you have to be vigilant, you have to be proactive, and you have to be arming yourself with the resources and experts who can come in and help you defend your organization. So with that, I want to thank James Carroll from Hackett Cyber for such an informative presentation. James, it's always a treat to get to hear you speak. So thank you very much.
Thank
And
you.
on behalf of ACCI, Amnet, IT Synergy, and Sagason, thank you for joining us for another one of our quarterly webinar programs. And we look forward to seeing you on the next session. Take care, everybody. Thanks, James.
Thank you. Take care.